Hey guys, Ewan from What Culture here today, and given Joker 2019 has just dropped, it seems rather apt to chronicle the character's history on the big screen. Given all the vagueness associated with the Joker's origin, it should come as no surprise that the story of how he came to the pages of Batman's comics is also a muddled one. Apparently the product of three creators, Joker's true origin, whether it was down to Bob Kane, Bill Finger, woohoo, Jerry Robinson, also woohoo, or all three, died with those three. But there is something interesting and very pertinent about Robinson's account of the Joker that has shaped the way the character has appeared in various movie appearances over the years. In the comics, Joker was initially a murderous force of nature and a typically unhinged serial killer type. The initial plan was to kill him off after only his second appearance, as his continued appearances were deemed to compromise Batman's ability as a hero. Thankfully, that was overruled, and he returned to become Batman's most famous villain of all time. From there, what Robinson said about him rings particularly true. He claimed in 1975 that he wanted to create a supreme arch-villain who could easily test Batman, and not just a run-of-the-mill crime lord designed to be disposed of after one story. Even more pertinently, he wanted to establish Joker as a reflection of his studies at Columbia University into characterization on the importance of contradiction. Joker became Batman's contradiction. Unfortunately, controversy would eventually clip Joker's wings through the second half of the 1950s as the Comics Code Authority, stamped down on comics content and turned the increasingly murderous Joker into a goofy moron. At that point, his clown appearance became less of an expression of the grotesque intended to shock and more a fitting costume with the fool he'd since become. By the time the first Batman movie came out, he was still that same fool, even as the comics had relegated him to the verge of obscurity. At the very least, there was still something important in his relationship with contradiction that still rung true. Number 5. Batman 1966. So, let's get started with the Joker's first major big screen release. The first movie Joker wasn't just an expression of the comics. He was a reflection of societal anxieties in a period of great social and cultural change. Cesar Romero's flamboyant rapscallion clown was ostentatious, larger than life, and a chaotic challenge to acceptable norms. Also, the tash underneath the makeup was chef's kiss quality good. Don't try and argue otherwise. In the world that gave birth to Adam West's Batman, the Caped Crusader wasn't so much a champion for Gotham's downtrodden little people. He was an instrument of the law, a weapon of government. He was a stick-in-the-mud stooge in a costume designed to infiltrate stranger worlds, but who clearly wasn't made of the same stardust. In the eyes of the quote-unquote establishment, Romero's Joker was an extreme symbol of the dangers of flower power, free expression, and cultural defiance. His costume wasn't just that of a clown, it was of someone alien to the ideas of restriction and morality that were crumbling with the arrival of rock and roll and miniskirts, and his whole absurd characterization painted his villainy as being fundamentally tied to this difference. Given the seismic changes the 60s wrought in American society, it should come as no surprise that the man would build a nightmare out of the difference and exoticness that Robinson had claimed were his inspiration for the Joker. After a movie and 3 seasons, Romero's Joker gave way to another take on the character, albeit after a considerable period walking the wilderness, but it was still a reflection of the society that created him, and that very much transferred across to the next Joker. Number 4. Batman 1989. As with all of Burton's Batman universe characters, his Joker was at least partly coloured by his own experiences with so-called acceptable society. He was an oddity himself to the degree that the British crew who welcomed him to the late 80s Batman set were baffled by him, not only by his inexperience and perceived lack of credentials, but because of his gothic, vagrant look. Unlike the 1960s Batman though, Burton adopted the idea of his Batman also being a freak. A stupid, sexy freak, but a freak all the same. He was a monster who just happened to have a different motivation to the villains he sought to take down. And while some of those bad guys were sympathetic figures who were the product of their treatment, i.e. Penguin and Catwoman, it's no accident that the two who were most obviously malignant to their core were the most linked to corporate greed. Burton's Joker has way more in common with Max Schreck than he does with the Penguin. Sure, both live in the underworld, but Joker's aspirations are pinned more to consumeristic greed than to acceptance, and his vengeance and his transformation is merely a bolt-on to existing evil. For a man who had frequently been accused of being a drug addict because of how he looked, whose quirks of personality were deemed strange and offensive, and whose inner sweetness came as a surprise to those who initially judged him, Joker wasn't a horror movie monster. Because horror movie monsters were who Burton had grown up with, who he'd found kinship with. Batman is his horror movie monster. Joker is something else. He's effectively a yuppie villain, wearing a suit even after his transformation, relying on commercials to spread his evil messages like a bizarre spokesperson for Reaganomics. And more than that, Joker was a reflection of something more personal to Burton and a means to express the contradiction of his own image. He was an alien to his family, misunderstood by his father and mother, and estranged from his brother. He was a young boy who sought comfort in the oddities of Vincent Price's works. That's why his work so frequently features stunted identities trapped in youth. Burton had a fear of growing up, and for him, Joker was everything about growing up and following patterns that he absolutely hated. The Joker is in this sense an instrument of mass order. He seeks not just to control Gotham's residents, but to transform them as one into his grotesque image. He's the very personification of corporate consumerism, forcing his brand on others as Batman stands up for individualism. Therein lies the fundamental dichotomy of the two. Bruce Wayne was Burton, a loner, isolated but fiercely committed to helping protect identities like his own. Joker was a personification of late 80s greed and the increasing commodification of identity. A resurgence, if you will, of the little boxes mentality Malvina Reynolds first scolded in 1962, of which Romero's Joker, ironically, was symbolically opposed. That idea might have ended up going through a serious filter by the time the Joker returned after the whole Schumacher debacle, but Christopher Nolan's version was still based on Burton's agenda to take the absurd and make it real. Number 3. The Dark Knight. By the time Heath Ledger's Joker arrived, he did so not in a pure adaptation of the Batman comics, but what the director and Ledger did draw from the comics was that same old dichotomous relationship between the Caped Crusader and Gotham's Clown Prince. Nolan's trilogy is fairly obsessed with duplicity. The whole series is essentially one big masquerade ball where everyone's masks slip and we get to see their real demons. And more than previous movies, partly because of those ideas, Ledger's Joker was even more overtly presented as a flipped image of Batman. Tim Burton's writing had imagined Joker and Batman as two sides of the same character, and Nolan took that idea and truly ran with it. For all the vagueness and the frustrations around Ledger's Joker origin, the single most compelling truth he tells is the suggestion that he was created by Batman. He gave him purpose and balance, and without him, there simply would be no Joker. And he sets about proving that the same conflict exists in everyone. He wants to prove that everyone, including Batman, can be their own Joker if they're just given the right push, just like Alan Moore and Brian Boland did in The Killing Joke decades earlier. The most intriguing idea of the whole trilogy, however, is of everyone guided not by a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, but a Batman on one and a Joker on the other. If I get to choose, well, I want mine to be Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, just because. Well, moving on to less fortunate depictions now, and number 2, Suicide Squad. In some ways, Jared Leto's Joker was born out of a need to both reclaim the character for the fans of the cause, but also to be so different and so revolutionary that he could barely exhibit any of the character's defining characteristics. He wasn't so much a reflection of society as he was an attempt to take superficial things out of the comics. But then, as David Ayer initially planned, Leto's Joker would have been more of a product of social anxieties around toxic masculinity and the commodification of sex as a weapon. His relationship with Harley Quinn should have been Ayer's commentary on the dynamic between unlawful male sexual aggression and power inequalities in relationships, but so much of it was edited out that his Joker ended up lacking drive, nuance, or substance. It's also probably fair to say that Leto's Joker missed Batman, but it was never meant to be his opposite. In Suicide Squad, Harley Quinn is the yin to his yang, and it's in her that we see Ayer exploring what should have been the film's most clever real-world consideration, the idea of how easily people can be radicalized, given the right inspiration. In a world otherwise governed by complex villains playing heroes, complex because each of them had something we were supposed to empathize with, the Joker is a wild card. He's arguably more dangerous because there's nothing of Batman reflected in him, but without the subtleties that were ripped out of his characterization, all we got was a pantomime garish idiot whose motivations were missing, taking that message about radicalization with it. Also, the laugh. God, it's so bad. And number 1, Joker 2019. After years of never finding out where Joker came from on screen, largely because the conversation was a redundant one until it became so definitive in the Ledger Joker story, the latest Joker seeks to offer shape to how Joker was created, and there's a big reason why it's necessary. The movie isn't merely an attempt to demystify the character, it's more a means to reframe him and tell the story of how the Joker inspired Batman, rather than the other way around. We've seen that before, of course, in Batman 1989, but there's more to it here. In stark contrast to Ledger's Joker, which will always inevitably be the most valuable comparison point given its success, Arthur Fleck is not a reflection of Batman. He's more a reflection of Gotham itself. Joker thrusts us into a Gotham breaking apart, torn from within by insidious greed and implied corruption as the city's working class, like Fleck, are chewed up and spit out. His perverse blossoming is in a cocoon made by the city's willful neglect of him and of everyone like him, and he rises like Gotham's savior, though it's not something he personally embraces, which is something we see in Nolan's Joker too. The allegories in Joker are the most pertinent part of the film and the one that's fired up the old discourse already, because Joker isn't just a product of his Gotham, he's a product of our world too. He's the result of the same kind of celebrity cult worship, the same kind of mental health system failings, the same disconnect between rich and poor, and for Todd, I can't make a joke about anything anymore, boo-hoo, Phillips, he's a response to the perils of supposedly quote-unquote woke culture. In a world where tyrants and demagogues occupy actual seats of power, where truth no matter count if it's less entertaining than a lie, and where morality has been diluted to the point where the people reinforce the messages of the man and the establishment as some corporate hero, of course there'd be no superhero to take on Joker. Joker holds a mirror up to our faces more than any of the other Batman arch-nemeses before him. Arthur Fleck has gone from being Batman's mirror image, a phenomenon created by the Dark Knight's very existence, to being an impulse reaction to our existence. This latest Joker is just as much about contradiction, but he's the logical result of what happens when a society sees things it doesn't like about itself and tries to hide them. Gotham and Thomas Wayne made a clown out of him, amplifying what was already there, and if they hadn't failed Arthur, there'd be no Joker. Whether the film executes that conceit well is up for debate, but there's still very much a message here about looking to our own that we cannot ignore. And that was our little piece on all the Joker movie origins. Special shout out to Cy Gallagher for putting together such a great script, so be sure to check him out on Twitter at Cy Gallagher. Before you do though, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and head back on over to whatculture.com for more lists like this every day. Once again, I've been Ewan, have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!